Yeah. Welcome to our first webinar on music and social impact. Our aim is to disseminate research and lived experience to a wider audience in the hope that more funders and practitioners will integrate music into their programs. Our webinars will be covering a host of themes, including music and conservation, music and conflict resolution, music and trauma, music and learning, music and aging. The list is long. For today's seminar entitled Music and Detention, the Uses and Misuses of Music as a Tool for Social Impact in a Prison Setting, a huge thank you, first of all, to Lucas Pairon, I hope I pronounced that right, for putting SIM, Social Impact of Music Making, into action and into the arena. SIM has also just become our new fiscal sponsee, so welcome aboard, SIM. And thanks to you as well, Lucas, we have 4 experts in the field who will be sharing their insights with us from Boston, UK, Belgium, and Oslo. The webinar timing is overall 1 hour, and you will each have 15 minutes to unpack your experience of music and its interaction with people in detention facilities. Our aim is to leave our audience with accessible ideas of what to bear in mind when either creating or integrating music into an existing organization or funding a project that uses music. So without further ado, I shall welcome Lucas to introduce SIM.
Yes, so thank you for this initiative, and I'm so glad that some of our friends, scholars, could join us who know much more than me about research on music, the music practice in prisons and in detention centers. And so I don't know who I will introduce first, but
Oh, we're going to start with Sarah.
yes, okay.
Yeah, Sarah, Oinya, and then Andre, because Andre's coming in. He's traveling to this Zoom as we speak, probably.
Yes. Well, Sarah Doxat Pratt, she knows Sim well. Maybe I will introduce Sim in a few words later on. But I thought that Sarah needed to be asked to give a short presentation of her work. So I give you the word the floor immediately. It's because you can better introduce yourself than I would do. I would be able to do it, Sarah.
Thank you, Lucas. I will start. I'm just going to share my screen because I've got some slides. Right, is that coming up okay for everyone?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. There we go. Well, good afternoon. So my name is Sarah Doxat Pratt. I'm currently a research fellow at the University of Nottingham. And I'm delighted to be here to speak today about music and detention. What I'm going to do is outline some areas of impact of music and the arts more generally in detention settings from various of my own research projects. And then I'll also suggest some kind of practical considerations that I think are worth bearing in mind or asking about when pursuing these kinds of projects. I'll be drawing mostly from 2 research studies, which I'll explain more about as they come up in turn. So to start, I want to present some quantitative findings from the Inspiring Futures research evaluation. So Inspiring Futures was a large-scale evaluation of arts projects in criminal justice settings in England and Wales, taking place between 2019 and 2023. Along with colleagues at the University of Cambridge Institute of Criminology, we worked with 8 different arts partners, providing music or drama or mixed arts projects in various prison, probation, and community justice settings. These projects included things like songwriting, music production, Indonesian gamelan music, creating and performing a play, drama improvisation. The evaluation was a mixed method study, but for the quantitative element, we wanted to measure change over time in various areas of impact that we'd seen through the years of research. So we designed some questionnaires which were filled in by participants at the beginning and at the end of projects. We had 182 participants in total, of which most were in prison we presented a series of Likert scale questions. So a statement to which people could answer on a 5-point scale, strongly disagree at 1 and strongly agree at 5. And these all related to the composite variables around creative capital, around different elements of personhood and different elements of social capital. We gave the same questionnaire to others in prison who were not taking part in arts projects. They were often in education or in employment in order to form a comparison group. And so though the comparison group was smaller, just 71 people, it was large enough and well matched enough to offer some meaningful comparisons with our participant group. So I'm going to give a quick explanation of these numbers for those who are not familiar with this kind of reporting. So these are from Wilcoxon signed rank tests, which is a test designed to compare scores on the same measure at 2 time points. So on the top line of each row, what you're seeing is the mean score from all participants at time 1, which is the beginning of a project, and the mean score at time 2, at the end of a project. The P number is the significance. And so this tells us how likely it is that the difference we're seeing can truly be attributed to what we're testing. So the smaller the value, the more statistically significant. So any score of less than 0.05 is considered statistically significant. It means there's a 95% chance that the difference we're seeing can be attributed to what we're testing. So in this instance, the improvements we're seeing can be attributed to the arts project. The R number is the effect size. That's what's highlighted in green. It's shown only when there is a statistically significant result. It could theoretically be between 0 and 1, where 0.1 to 0.3 would be considered a small effect size and 0.3 to 0.5 considered medium. So I apologize for the slightly technical bit, but I think it's important to understand what's happening here. So what we're seeing is in all of our areas of impact, small to medium, statistically significant improvements in the comparison group and no statistically significant change in the comparison group. So in the participant group, the P number is always lower than 0.05, sometimes even smaller than that, which means more significant. But in the comparison group, it's always above 0.05, and so there is no R number. The results aren't really statistically meaningful at all. And so the areas of impact that we were looking at were creative capital, and this is where we see the clearest and largest improvements over time. Participants saw their artistic skills improving, or they were learning brand new skills. They had access to artistic opportunities or the arts world that they had felt excluded from previously. They started seeing themselves as artistic people. This we found was particularly important in the music project where there was, or projects where there were more emphasis on learning skills. The second area that we looked at was aspects of personhood. So this was seeing improvements in well-being, in self-concept, so being able to see themselves as more than just a prisoner or more than just a criminal or other labels that can often be given to people in the criminal justice system. And in personal development, so being able to grow and to change and having opportunities to do so. And then we were looking at social capital or aspects of social capital. So we saw improvements in communication skills, in relationships, and this included relationships within the group, but also relationships with people outside of the group, and people's perspectives on their own relationships with people they didn't know or new people. And we saw improvements in working with others, so teamwork and collaboration skills. And as I say, all of these improvements that we saw in the participant group are small to medium size change. We wouldn't expect to see a large effect size because most of the projects we were looking at were fairly short, either once weekly for a couple of months perhaps, or every day, but for 1 or 2 weeks. These are the two most common ways of providing these kinds of projects, certainly within the work that I've done in England that I've seen. So we wouldn't expect to see massive change, but we can reliably say that these projects are making a difference for people who take part. Within Inspiring Futures, we were able to follow up with a small number of participants about 1 year after the end of their projects. These results are tentative because of the small numbers, But there is some evidence to suggest that although the effects do diminish or wear off a bit over time, there is still some long-term impact. And qualitatively, we found that people continue to remember these projects as important in their personal journeys. So that's an overview of some sort of large areas of impact that we've seen. The full report can be found online, and I've got a link to that in my slides at the end, and my references. But to focus in more specifically on music, I'm going to talk a bit more about well-being and community within prison music projects. And here I'm drawing more on my doctoral research, which involved one music organization's ongoing work in one English men's prison in 2015 and 2016. This organization provided both the kind of intensive week-long programs and also some regular ongoing sessions. But always their work involved songwriting in a broadly pop and rock genre with groups of imprisoned men. Participatory music is often considered an important contributor to well-being for all people in any context, really. I think a lot of people would say that. But I do think the prison context does make a difference. In a prison context, music provides something that is not necessarily provided by other forms of programming or intervention, such as education or employment or offending behavior programs. Group music projects are often seen as mitigating some of the pains of imprisonment. Prison is acknowledged to be painful and harmful. It can be isolating and lonely. It can be physically dangerous. It can lead to the deterioration of mental health. It can be very boring. And participatory music projects are different. They can provide a beneficial change or a spark that alleviates some of these harms. I should say there are some complications to that, which others may well touch on here and have touched on in the research. But this is certainly something that is said a lot and can be the case that group music making in a prison context can mitigate some of the harms done to them by the prison system itself. But what I found in my research was that well-being was particularly linked to what people call the social side of the projects. So you might be familiar with the idea of a removal activity. So some kind of activity that psychologically removes people from a painful day-to-day and gives some relief from those kinds of norms. I refer to prison music projects as removal communities. So that is, it's not just the activity that takes people out of normal life, but it was also the social environment created by people making music together in that space. This community was different to and better than the norm of prison social life. So group music making, I found, provided a safe social context, which made new things possible. So as well as the personal development that we saw on the previous slide, which in themselves are good for well-being, it's good for people to feel like they are progressing, that they are doing something purposeful with their time. But music projects also enabled personal expression and emotional exploration in a group context, in what can be a fairly repressive environment generally in prison. Music projects gave a context in which fruitful social relationships could flourish. People found new connections, shared heritage. They worked alongside people that they might never have had the opportunity to work with before. Participants commented on the way in which music projects brought together different factions within the prison in an enjoyable and productive way rather than a competitive way. And so what I found was that in certain circumstances, this social environment could translate outside of the music project itself and onto the prison landings and into the general life of the prison. So if participants were on the same wing and therefore able to see each other outside of the organized activities, they sometimes continued to write songs together. Or sometimes they had a newfound closeness that continued and became a relationship that helped them deal with some of the other things going on in prison. If they had access to instruments, which some prisons in England do allow, then they taught one another or they continued jamming together in their downtime. So they were continuing to pursue these stress relieving and purposeful activities. And sometimes others on the wing who hadn't been involved in the initial project would get involved in these more informal times of group music making. There are, of course, limits to what is possible in prison, but where there is access in certain situations, the social impact of these music projects was not limited to the time in the project itself. It was felt beyond that time. I've written about this, and again, the reference for that is on my slides at the end if you're interested in more. But to end, I'd like to just consider some practical elements of these projects that I think are worth thinking about or asking when pursuing these kinds of projects. So there's not necessarily a right and wrong answer to any of these, but I think it's good to think about the differences that these can make. So first of all, project structure. As I said, lots of music in prisons work is one-off kind of intensive weeks or fortnights where participants will come in every day, starting on a Monday, ending on a Friday, and then it's finished. They might perform at the end, but then it's done. These can often seem quite glamorous, and they do provide a catalyst for change. They can sort of shake life up a bit and give a spark that can lead on to other things. But I do also think ongoing provision, the sort of steady, ongoing, regular music sessions over a series of months, or even sort of unlimited while people are in that prison, can provide some stability and some longevity to these programs. And a mix of both can also be good. People being able to experience the one-off intensive time, but also to have some regular ongoing sessions as well. And similarly, I think thinking about whether an organization is working ongoingly in one prison or one region, or working in any prison that will take them, where they have a kind of a package that is ready to deliver anywhere. That can be really beneficial, particularly when things change suddenly in prisons, which they do, they can just offer that somewhere else. But I do think an ongoing relationship in one prison can mean that less time is spent getting things set up and getting things going, and more energy can be focused on actually doing the work. Secondly, the good functioning of the establishment. And I think this is possibly what we found to be the biggest factor in affecting the experience of a project and also the impact. What is the communication or organization like in advance and during a project itself? When these are difficult, it can lead to problems in experience and in impact. So relationships with someone in the senior leadership team can be really key. But if you're over reliant on one person, that can make things tricky, because if they're away or if they're ill or if they get transferred to a different site, it's hard to know what you're going to do. It's good to ask, is there a clear plan for recruiting participants, or could it be a struggle to get good numbers? And having clear oversight is important. So who from the prison is actually going to make it happen on the front line? If the governor is on board, is that translating down to frontline staff? The frontline staff understanding what's happening and supportive of the participants? Really specific questions. Who's going to escort the team from the prison gate? Who's going to ensure participants are unlocked and on the right activity list to be able to attend? These are very granular questions, I know, but they do really make a difference to whether a project can happen and to what happens when it does. And finally, I think endings are really important. What's the exit strategy? What happens when a project stops? Particularly for intensive projects, but really any, it can be quite difficult when they come to an end. So is there someone who can manage that transition back to normal with the participants? Is there someone who's going to check in and see how they're doing, particularly after what can be quite an emotionally intense time? Are there opportunities for continued musical engagement? As we saw, that the development of creative capital can be a really important impact from these projects, and people can feel like they've learned new skills or developed new passions that they want to be able to continue. Is it a possibility? And is there a possibility to capitalize on the personal and social development that has taken place during the course of the project? We found that education departments might say that their work with their students has improved if those students took part in a music project. Music can be a stepping stone into other courses, into education. It can increase people's confidence so that they might go for an education course that they might have otherwise not considered, or an employment opportunity. But these opportunities need to be available. And this is also linked to the good functioning of the establishment. It seems likely that one of the factors in determining long-term impact is whether there is provision that will enable participants to progress further after a project has finished. And that, I think, is worth considering when looking at setting up these projects. I think it's helpful to consider all of these practical details, and not only these. This is not an exhaustive list, but it makes a difference to the running of a project and the impact of a project. And on that note, I will come to an end. I will just bring up my references so that they're there, and I will hand back to Sita to go next.
Thank you. I think it's incredibly useful to have some of those figures, because I think one of the big struggles with all arts projects is proving impact. So I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will be looking at these at that work. I think in the interest of time, we should move straight on to Oinya. I pronounced that right? Who has done some fascinating work in, well, you're going to be speaking about it in especially in the Philippines.
Just going to try and get this PowerPoint up, which is not showing up now. Okay, hold on a second.
Oh, well, while you do that, I just want to say, Sarah, I think your list of considerations, the nitty-gritty, the teams, the communication, the backstage work, I think that's so important for anybody considering a new project. Great.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much for bearing with me. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, that's the slides. Perfect. Okay. I'll try and keep the time, but if I'm going over, feel free to just give me a little nudge. Thank you so much for being here today and for this invitation. I'm delighted to talk to you about some of my ongoing research and to reflect on some research from before, especially in this lovely company that we're in today. I'm hoping to talk to 3 main points today in the short time that I have. I'd like to touch on some of the previous research that I've done at the Cebu Provincial Detention and Rehabilitation Center in the Philippines, before talking about my current research project, of which I'm in year 4 of a 4-year project, so we're getting toward the end of it now. And then also to very briefly mention a book that's coming out that's on this topic, which I think will be of interest to anyone who's tuning in today. So my previous research was focused on music in detention in this jail, the Cebu Provincial Rehabilitation and Detention Center in Cebu in the Philippines. This particular jail gained international attention for its unique approach to rehabilitation through music and dance performances that were shared through YouTube videos that started being posted online in about 2006, up until for about 10 years, until 2015, 2016. My research on this phenomenon took a kind of a dual approach. I was looking at it both as a sort of an object of music that was put up on the internet, where you saw 1,500 prisoners dancing to various kinds of pop songs, and then being shared online. All these videos went viral back in the day. One of the most famous dances that they did was to Michael Jackson's Thriller, and it sparked a whole online debate, as well as many comments and many articles, as well as turning the actual prison into a real tourist site, where people could come and have experience the live dances in person. You could get tickets from City Hall and sit in the prison and be part of the sort of the spectacle of imprisonment, as I called it, in the work that came later. So I was quite interested in how music served as a powerful medium for expression in this prison, allowing these prisoners not only to connect with each other, but also to the outside world. But I also found this to be quite problematic, because I considered these performances to be potentially quite dangerous, which is what I wrote about in a book that came out on this topic a couple of years ago. The book is called Dangerous Mediations, and in one of the reviews from it mentions here exactly some of these kinds of problems that I interrogated. So this I built on literature on music and power, subversion, trauma, colonialism, and violence, in order to interrogate the complicity of performers, audiences, and media in shaping power dynamics and subjectivities in a globalized post-colonial context. And even though I was just looking at this one case study of a prison that it turns out was in fact forcing people to participate in this music and dance program, it was still quite complicated because there were some people who obviously enjoyed participating, who did get a lot of benefit out of doing this. And I spoke to some of them when I went there to the Philippines, but there were obviously people who didn't because it's not for everybody. And I think agency is the key here. And it became sort of the main argument where I realized that, of course, without agency, none of this is can be called music therapy or dance therapy. So yeah, so I documented this kind of relationship between these kind of musically mediated representations and the actual lived experiences of these people in prison who had never consented to being broadcasted all over YouTube and all over the world. And I think this reminded me a lot of some previous criminological research by people like Niels Christie, for example, who have talked about how there is a danger inherent in sort of disguising certain things as treatment, training, or pure help to suffering individuals in need of such measures. And there's been a lot of criticisms about how sometimes the arts, and particularly music, can fall victim to this kind of accusation. Chelitos has written about this as kind of calling it a kind of declarative justice, that it may not be something that provides as much help as we think. So so you can read about this in both the book, but also in the Torture Journal, the Journal of Rehabilitation of Torture Victims and Prevention of Torture, where I discussed this more, because I talked about the danger of these kinds of mediated images being reduced to just tropes or memes, as you can see in the kind of example here, where the prisoners have become sort of kind of just stereotypes or caricatures in very many popular media content. So so this yeah, I think reinforced a lot of existing power dynamics that I saw happening in these kinds of very harmful and very very subversive environments. But this then, in my more recent research, just to sort of hop over a little bit now, is the Prisons of Note project, of which I was really fortunate to get a research grant from the Research Council of Norway to do a 4-year study, which investigates many of the themes that I explored in the Philippines, but in a different context, so particularly in Norway, Ireland, and Iceland. I'm just going to draw very quickly on 2 examples from this, because I'm really glad that Sarah was able to paint such a really good detailed picture of the kind of stakes and the mechanics of setting up a lot of these kinds of initiatives. Norway has a very well established prison system, one of probably the most progressive in the world, at least by criminological standards, and one that people have often looked to in terms of examples of how, and I will use air quotes here, best to do prison. So they do have a very long established use and history of using music in prison since the 90s in different ways. And I wrote about this a little bit in an article that came out, actually edited by here, Lucas Perron and Bridie Lee Bartlett, a special issue of Musica Sciente on the social impact of music making. And here I talked about the sort of typology of music in prison that you see in Norwegian prisons. You have a very long established history of concerts and performances happening within the prison systems here, people touring, external musicians coming in to put on concerts and events inside of the prisons, as well as musicians in prisons performing for others in prison. Then there's the more sort of formal music education route that's usually offered through schools within the prison system. That can include musical instrument tuition, composition, music theory, these kinds of pedagogical aspects of music. You also then have music therapy in several of the prisons here in Norway, which is quite unique. It's not something that you see very often internationally. There are some prisons here in Norway where they have a music therapist employed as part of the correctional staff, as part of like the security staff. So that's quite unique. And then, of course, there are many opportunities for personal musicking as well. If you bring in an instrument, for example, and Sarah mentioned that is allowed in some prisons here in Norway, as well as just individual access to the music room or music studio to perform for yourself. So this kind of musical ecosystem that we see happening in Norway is quite established. Yet what I found interesting in doing the research here is that it still tends to be in practice more of a reward than a right. It's not something that's equally shared among all people in prison and among all of the prisons that are in Norway. So it's still there is quite quite a difference in who has access to things and how they are done. But one of the examples I'd like to touch on, which I found particularly inspiring, is a band of women who all met serving sentences in the women's prison in Oslo. The band are called Venus Harlem. And when they were set up by the music teacher and facilitator, Venus Nielsen, who's a very, very well-known music teacher, music facilitator here in Oslo. And she's pictured here in the photograph, just in the corner. She's playing the guitar, sitting down in the picture there, just. And she noticed how when people were coming out of prison, there was a sort of a lack of support. And of course, we know from the statistics, we know from research that this is a very, very vulnerable time for many people. Returning into society after serving a prison sentence can be very difficult, and it can be especially difficult for women as well. So this band now exists on the outside. And so through continued support from an organization called Music in Custody and Freedom, who fund a weekly rehearsal space in downtown Oslo. These women are able to meet every single week, have a regular meeting session, practice rehearsal every single week to support each other through music making, but also through everything else that you need support with when kind of returning into society, finding accommodation, finding jobs, just getting back on your feet. And this is a wonderful example, I think, of something that's very sustainable, very easy to initiate and support in many ways, but that has very, very profound impact. And so we've been doing some work with them. We're recording an EP with them at the moment as well, so that will be coming out as part of the project. And I think it's a very effective way of supporting people in that transition, which is something that's often overlooked in the research as well, from prison back into community. And that's a really important part, I think, of prisons in Norway and in many parts of the world as well, of course, is that many people are coming out of prison and returning. So how can we best support them, and how can music be a way to support people in that transition? The other example I've wanted to talk about is in Ireland, where my research highlights a slightly different angle again, but one about bridging that kind of community prison relationship. So one of the primary case studies that I've been researching in the last few years here is the in-house harmony choir, which is an inside-outside choir. And by that, I mean inside, meaning incarcerated choir members, singers, and outside meaning non-incarcerated members. In this case, it's office workers. So it started as a workplace choir for a group of women, primarily women, who work in an office in Dublin. And they meet together with the inside choir members inside of the prison every week to sing together. And this has been happening for over 6 years. Unfortunately, just before Christmas this year, however, the prison decided to suspend the practices indefinitely due to operational reasons. And Sarah mentioned as well just how often this happens in prison projects, and I've seen this happen a lot, that just there can be a change of leadership, there can be a change of just direction, there can be crisis after crisis within the prison system. In the case of the Irish prison system, there's extreme overcrowding at the moment, so that's causing a lot of havoc on activities like this that have been happening, with volunteers coming in and offering these kinds of music opportunities. But it's been quite remarkable because I've been following this choir and the impact and effect that it's had. In the photo here, you just see the outside members, of course, because I can't actually take pictures inside of the prison. This is just outside of Mountjoy prison. But it's very much one choir when they sing together. It's the inside and outside members coming together. And it's a really a unique bond that they have formed over these years. Music has become an invaluable tool for these singers, for both the outside and the inside members, and that's been a really inspiring thing to witness and to learn from over the last number of years. And it's had wider impact too among family members, and this is something that I think has been not as researched, and kind of something that I've been noticing and trying to gather more data on, because these choirs have put on a number of concerts and events inside the prison over the last number of years, and because Dublin is essentially still quite a small place, family members from both the inside and outside choir members would come together for these performances, and they've all gotten to know each other, they've gotten to support each other and form a kind of community that surrounds this choir as well, which has been really, really special. So I think this is something quite unique. Some of the events, yeah, they've also recorded albums. They've released albums in order to raise money for different funding initiatives to charities supporting homelessness. They've put on different types of symposia and concerts within the prison as well, which I've been involved with. So there are all kinds of public-facing opportunities that they have also been able to be a part of, and to invite people into the prison to get to hear directly from people with lived experience of imprisonment. The choir does very much sort of sit between these two worlds, as one of the choir members has mentioned in some of the conversations we've had about this. And it's quite a difficult position to be in sometimes, because you're very much trapped between two worlds. You're trying to navigate, working with the prison system, which can have so many rules and regulations, and it can be quite exhausting. So one of the things that I've noticed in making this choir particularly sustainable is that it is a workplace choir. So all of the people who come are using their very kind time from their employers to be able to leave work a little bit early on a Wednesday afternoon to come and be there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They're delighted because they get to leave the office early and come. It's really good for their well-being, for their work ethic. And so they are seeing it as very much an escape from the working life as well. And it's not just about the sort of benefits that are for the people who are in prison. So this is something that's, I think, quite unique in this kind of context. And I think it does a lot to build community. We've been observing and catching responses from some different events that have been happening within the prison. People have filled out many surveys, and these are kind of some of the responses that members of the general public have had through hearing this choir perform and hearing first person accounts of what being in the choir and what it means for them to be part of this kind of music making environment. And so I think all of this is to say that it offers different ways of offering pathways to citizenship, to perform citizenship, for people to be active citizens within their community, and it assists them on their return on the way out. They have a network now, they have people that they know, they have an organization that they feel like they can go to. And it's had a very real impact for this particular organization, because they've now actually included a new mandate to employ people coming out of prison. So it's actually had an impact in a very visceral way for this particular organization, Solace. The last thing I want to mention is that this touches on, of course, the research of many other scholars who've come before, including people like Professor Mary Cohen in the US, who've commented on the particularly vital role of music in fostering communities of caring individuals, both inside and outside prison. And I think both of these case studies provide a kind of compelling narrative that examines how cultural contexts influence the role of music in the lives of people in prison. The last thing I want to mention is that these case studies and many more are going to be featured in a book that's coming out later this year called Sound in Detention. And it has over 40 contributors. I'm delighted to say we have many, many people involved in this book, including Andre de Quadros here, who's on the call, and many others. And it's a wonderful collection of people with lived experience of imprisonment, as well as people who have worked in music facilitation in prisons, as well as people who are working in asylum detention and refugee, many other different types of spaces of detention around the world. So if anyone's interested, you can find out more about that. You can follow, I have a little link here at the end where you can scan and find out more about the Prisons of Note project and the publications that are coming out as part of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And I know that one of the biggest questions is how can you translate small scale projects in smaller areas to urban settings? Because obviously a lot of prisoners are not lucky enough to be based near their home. And the reoffending rates obviously drop, as we know, when people are supported on that exit. So much more to talk about that, but we'll move on to Andre, because he traveled valiantly across town to be here in time, and so please start, Andre.
Thank you very much. I'm have an apology, first of all, for entering late, and secondly, for being in a kind of a public space here. So I apologize for the background noise. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you.
You can hear me? Right, it's good. Well, I'm going to speak for a few moments and share some slides. But I'm also, I also have one of my principal collaborators from prison who's on the phone, and he's going to speak to you because I have been always of the opinion that I never want to speak about work in prison without somebody in prison who's talking with me at the same time. So so I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit. I do want to say thank you so much to Sita and to Elizabeth for organizing this, and it's lovely to see Aina again. And yes, as she pointed out, I have a chapter in her book, and she has a chapter in my book. It's going to be coming up. And Sarah, lovely to see you, and my dear friend, my admirer so much, Lucas, so nice to see you too. So I wanted to talk specifically about empowering song, which is the pedagogy that I established in prison. So I should give you a little bit of context here. I'm not American, and when I came to the United States about 20-something years ago, I was struck by the brutality that I saw around me, and so that I started to think about what I would do that would be different, and at that quite a long time ago, I started looking at prisons and incarcerations. The first prison I visited was in Thailand, a prison which is known as the Bangkok Hilton, because it is anything other than the Hilton. As you can imagine, a terrible place. And I started doing field work in other prisons, including in Germany and in South America and other places. And then when I started to turn my attention more specifically to the United States, I discovered the scope and scale of a human catastrophe that largely gets ignored. And so I think one can spend a tremendous amount of time talking about prisons in the United States, but 1 in 2 Americans are affected by incarceration. 1 in 3 Black women have someone they love in prison. 97 to 99% of all people in federal prisons in the United States have never had a trial, leave aside even a fair trial. So we're talking about, and we're talking about millions of people who have been incarcerated. And what we see today is an ongoing more than 400 years of brutality against the social and emotional fabric of African Americans. The brutality is of such a scale, there is not a single family, and not a single African American family who has not been affected by incarceration. The dean of our college at Boston University is African American, has a relative in prison. When you talk to African Americans, you discover that it's the norm. Just last week, one of my very close collaborators, whose name is Onyx White, we're collaborating on a number of different projects, came out of prison. He's 27, 28, I can't remember how old he is. And he was in a car driving with his brother, and he was at a traffic stop or it was pulled over by a cop, and she accused him of speeding. And the very accusation to somebody who has been in prison, who is on parole, lands them potentially back in prison, even without necessarily a trial. He went to a hearing, and he's awaiting further deliberations on his case. I want to point out that the cruelty and the brutality and the scope of American incarceration is of a scale that the world has never seen. And I think largely on the whole, non-Americans don't know it. And I have to say, my partner, who's a white middle-class American, and her life had never come in contact with it. And so for white Americans, if they haven't been into prisons and haven't had direct contact, they've been in contact zone, they also don't fully understand how terrible it is. And also that the legal system doesn't work to make any sense of it. So when I started going into prisons, I knew immediately before I went that the conventional pedagogies don't work. In other words, working in music in traditional conventional ways, teaching music or and so forth would actually be counterproductive. And I wanted to root my work and ground my work in pedagogies of liberation, of resistance, pedagogies of abolition and compassion and so forth. Paulo Freire talks about pedagogy of hope. In he talks about in the Pedagogy of Hope book, he talks about reconstituting the pedagogy of the oppressed into a pedagogy of hope. And so I saw myself very much anchored in that tradition. And so this is the Norfolk men's prison where Wayland happens to be now, and he's calling in from that. Although we'll probably lose the call in a minute, then he'll call back. So when I started working there many years ago, it was a prison for about 1,500 men. About half of them were there for life sentences of different kinds. In other words, you can have a life sentence without parole, which is what Wayland was originally sentenced to, or you can have life, which is a life sentence, a long sentence that actually lets you apply for parole hearing and so forth. So this is the prison that I started working in. And as I said, I wanted to establish a pedagogy that was specifically non-compliant. If you look at prisons are all about obedience, about discipline and control. And I wanted to create a pedagogy that was indisciplined, interdisciplined, and uncontrolled. And by that I mean I wanted to create a pedagogy in which being obedient was actually the opposite of what we wanted to encourage. So to take you a little bit more into it, I'm losing the call to Wayland, but he's going to call back. He only gets 20-minute slots. So I wrote it. He's going to call back. The book Empowering Song Music Education from the Margins was out in Routledge, and it details in great detail not only the pedagogy that was founded in prisons, but also with examples of my own work in refugee situations. So part of my work has been with refugees on the southern border, the United States-Mexico border, which has been a site of continuing traffic. I'm personally very sorry. Just let me.
This is a free call from an incarcerated individual at Massachusetts Department of Corrections. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. To accept this free call, press 1. To refuse this, thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
Hi, Wayland. I'm just finishing up some brief commentary, and then I'm going to hand over to you to speak. But this is the pedagogy, and also, as I mentioned, the pedagogy I've used the same pedagogy in my work with transgender refugees and other refugees in Mexico. But also my work for many years has been working with Israelis and Palestinians, and for 20 years or so. And the same pedagogy I have been using in that setting. So here, let me give you a quick summary of empowering song. It's interrogating and disrupting existing practice. It's focusing on the body, honoring the body as expressive and wise. In other words, how can we speak from the body, not just from the mind, not just from the heart? Making meaning from self and relationality. In other words, not only about yourself, but the self in the context of the community. Empowering song is fundamentally a storytelling approach. So, in other words, giving people in prison, creating conditions in which they can tell their stories through song creation, through poetry writing, through visual narrative, through other forms of storytelling, and essentially the long arc of African American tradition of freedom dreaming. And freedom dreaming is not just about freedom from prison, but it's an abolitionist paradigm, meaning how do we actually find a world and search for a world and work for a world that doesn't currently exist. So my colleague from UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, writes this in the foreword to the book. Empowering song uses music to reclaim humanity in inhumane places, smuggles imagination into dungeons, turns creativity from contraband into commissary. Under the envious eye of armed guards, it unlocks more knowledge on the prison yard than most scholars on Harvard Yard, runs rivers of refuge through deserts of despair, and liberates the spirit of community by any melody necessary. Empowering song is to music, what pedagogy of the oppressed is to education, and theater of the oppressed is to drama. They subvert the status quo by democratizing the school, the stage, and the studio. To an anchoring story, the body, the dreams, and much more, empowering song is epistemically democratic and abolitionist, a trans-pedagogical practice, trans-disciplinary, trans-generational, transgressive, transcendent, and transborder. This is Waylon Coleman, and this is an old photo. This is not a photo that was taken more recently. It's an older photo. Waylon Coleman was, as a teenager, was sent to prison for a crime he didn't commit. He has been 27 years in prison. He is one of the most extraordinary and remarkable human beings. He writes music, which we performed. He tells stories. He has a chapter in a book that I have written on displacement. And he's also a close collaborator on a project that called The Slaying of Innocence, that is going to be a major music theater project, an extremely expensive music theater project, I might say, which will involve people in prison and out of prison. And we started working on this project a while ago, and it will be performed on professional stages nationwide. I mean, there's a lot more I can talk about, but I'm going to hand over to Waylon to say a little bit about who you are as a person, and remember that the people you're speaking to are not American, and they don't fully understand the situation. So anyway, position yourself any way you like and talk about the work that we've been doing together and the empowering song approach and so on.
Well, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me well?
Yes. Hi.
So first, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you for a couple of minutes. My name is Waylon Coleman. I'm also called X by my incarcerated peers. As Andre said, I've been incarcerated for 27, nearly 28 years. And I was sentenced to actually die in prison by way of a life without the possibility of parole. And so I've been fighting to exonerate myself for all of that time. I'm currently eligible for parole under a change in the laws in Massachusetts. And so I'm under the emergent adult law now, so I am eligible for parole at this time. one of the things is Andre spoke about the external things about policing in America and the targeting of Black people. Since the abolition of plantation slavery, Blacks have been targeted for incarceration. And so he talked about that. And so I want to add on to what he said about that by talking a little bit about the internal aspects of American incarceration. So we all know that America is the self-proclaimed, and I'm going to emphasize my term, self-proclaimed, most powerful, wealthiest, and civilized nation on the planet, self-proclaimed. Now, in this most civilized nation on the planet, incarcerated people are exposed to toxic air, toxic land, toxic water, inhumane treatment, dehumanization, oppression, all of these negative things. We're not allowed to live any type of valuable life. There's no life value inside of the American prison system. And so everything is restricted. So I met Andre in the Empowering Song course through the Boston University Prison Education Program. And he came in with a very different approach than what we're used to. When people come into the American prison system, they're often trained to dehumanize us. So they're coached to not see us as human beings, to not get too close to us, to not care so much about us, to not help us. So where Andre is coming in under this volunteer training that would tell him, you can't touch any of the incarcerated people, Andre would come in and hug us all. That's what he means by disobedient in a sense, right? They would say, you can't become too personal with them. You can't care too much. So Andre would come in and make sure everybody's making eye contact and getting to know each other, right? So it was these counter moves that he was making against the normalized institutional rules that were allowing us to see a different kind of person coming in to interact with us. We interact with many volunteers, but we don't interact on such a personalized level that we were interacting with the Empowering Song volunteers. And that was because there was something just so much different. There was a different humanity attached to it, and that drew people in, right? When you're dehumanized for so many years of your life, any kind of recognition as a human being gains your attention. And so strategically, for Andre to recognize us as human beings, it immediately gained people's attention, and more people wanted to come in and meet this person who saw us as persons, right? I often say that in spite of the training that they gave to Andre, he was able to see the human being through the oppression. And that was both terrifying, right? Because again, that wasn't something that I was used to. So it was both terrifying and it was pleasing to know that someone saw my human through the oppression. So I wanted to speak about that a little bit. As far as music making goes, so I've always used art. I grew up in poverty in Birmingham, Alabama, United States. And I've always used art as a means to cope with poverty. And so by being in prison, I didn't have much when I first came in. And so I had to rely on my artwork to take care of myself. I learned how to write and create music. I'm self-taught. And so I learned how to write and create music. And when I met Andre, I was able to learn more about using music to express my activism. And so that's where I'm at now. Now I'm using music in different ways than I was using it before. Now my music is geared towards saying to the world, you need to see what's going on here. You need to figure out a way to end this type of dehumanization. I can say that through music now, and I can say that through art. So that's kind of what I've been doing since I've been incarcerated. I don't know how much time I got, but I hope that's enough of a platform so you'll understand a little bit about who I am and the work that I've been doing with Andre.
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure that people, you could talk for ages, and I could never get tired of hearing you. Like one of the things to mention, of course, is that solitary confinement, according to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, of any solitary confinement for 2 weeks or more constitutes an act of torture. There was an article that came out a few days ago called "Torture of Tortures," and solitary confinement is the torture of tortures. How many days have you spent in solitary confinement over your entire incarceration?
That's tough because I've spent years over my entire incarceration.
Okay, so you have spent years in like 1 year or 2 years, or take a guess.
Total time is probably maybe 4 years or so. Total time.
Right.
4 or 5 years.
So, I mean, I also want to recognize that when somebody has spent, I mean, when you say that, it really breaks my heart. Because I have to recognize that we're in the company of somebody who has suffered profound brutality, and these wounds that you carry, like so many people, like everybody who carries who's been in prison, falls on us, people on the outside, people like me who are privileged, to really think differently about how we engage, not only with people like you, but how we engage as members of society, and as teachers, as citizens, and so forth. But we're going to open the space for anybody to ask questions. I don't know whether I see that. I'm not sure about the format. Is this
Well,
is it question time, or?
yeah, I mean, Lucas, maybe you'd like to say something about Sim, but since we've got Wayland on the phone now, I think maybe now would be a good time for questions amongst us, because I don't know if we've had any sent through. This is recorded for later watching. I'm slightly thrown by having this live interaction. So I'm just thinking, I guess my question for you, Andre, was when you say obedience and disobedience in terms of expression, could you give us a tangible example, or maybe Waylon could, of like a music making or a song moment where disobedience was the, was the call?
Well, I mean, a lot of music instruction is about, well, do this, learn this song, and then learn this song and sing the right note and sing the wrong note, and these ideas of how we perform correctly. And oh my God, sorry, I'm in such a noisy place. I mean, these are complicated ideas, but they're also ideas that are rooted in very specific. Let me find another. Let me go to another part of this space. I think they are really about the rules. I don't think that's actually just at. I don't think it's just in prisons. I think it's actually in institutions, in educational institutions. It's about control and discipline. And so what Empowering Song was doing was saying, well, we're going to create a space in which you can create what you want to create. We gave people an inspirational line or inspirational quote. Like I'll give you an example. We had a project based around "Remember me, but forget my fate." This is the last aria in Dido's Dido and Aeneas by Purcell. This "Remember me, but forget my fate," right? So just from that, not telling people what to do, but saying, here is something for you to reflect on, and here's something for you to create on. So the idea, and some people, just to be clear, this idea of music as sonic, as art, and is purely a Eurocentric idea. I mean, the idea that music is sound and visual arts is visual, and theater is something that belongs in a particular kind of way. That's not how non-Western ideas are created. So So I just want to be clear that this idea of music is a Western idea, Eurocentric idea. It's a white idea. I mean, so when I grew up as a brown person in a brown country, it wasn't that idea that this idea of the music, even the word music doesn't exist in many languages. So what we want to do is to create in ways that are meaningful for you, and they cross over through beyond music into visual storytelling, narrative, different elements. It's essentially about creating spaces for people to express who they are and to be connected to other people through that creation. So I'm going to also mention another point, and I think Wayland, you might be able to speak about this a little bit. This idea of rival gangs. Now, I remember one particular occasion when we had an activity in the class, and I didn't know this until much later, that there were two rival gangs in the room, and the fact that we were closing eyes and meditating and holding hands was, I only discovered much later that there were these two guys who wanted to kill each other in prison. So it's not only simply about the sound and the music and the obedience, but the moment you create a space in which people can actually be who they want to be, but also recognize the humanity that essentially music making and empowering song approach is about addressing the core element of what it means to be human and understanding the humanity in others. Wayland, do you want to speak to that particular point?
Yeah, so with the rivalries in the prison, often, it's prison, and I'm not sure how other countries' prisons are set up, but American prisons are very violent environments sometimes. And so what happens is, you have different groups of people that join different gangs, or they're from different neighborhoods, and so they click up with their neighborhoods, or they're from different parts of the city, and they click up with that. And so there's always these groups, and oftentimes these groups have rivalries from fights that they've had in the streets, shootings that led people to prison and stuff like that. So sometimes we call it, it's a slang term called murder beef, where you kill my brother, and now, you go to prison, and, I end up in prison, and I see you, and you're the guy who killed my brother. We have murder beef, right? And so now I'm going to kill you because you killed my brother. And so a lot of that happens in prison. And so when Andre created this space for us, we don't often have spaces that's centered on self-expression, right? Us telling our story. And so when he created this space, what he didn't realize was that there were people in this space that were from these rival gangs who had murder beef, right? Murder, they were fighting, they were killing each other in the streets. And so because of the pedagogy, one of the reasons I think what happened with the gang members is that he often made us pair with people that we didn't know, or people we weren't comfortable with. So, you can't be with your friend. You have to go be paired and organize this performance piece with somebody that you don't normally talk to. And what was happening was the people in the group started getting more comfortable, and the rivals...
You have 1 minute left.
The rivals started building friendships, and they were taking these friendships out into the general population of the prison, and they were squashing their gang beefs. And so it was reducing a lot of the violence that was going on in the prison because of the interaction in the empowering song group. And I just thought that was a very unique part of that transformation inside of people.
Thank you. It sounds like you're going to be cut off in a minute, Wayland. So we just want to thank you so much for giving your time and speaking to us.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate all of the work that you all do. It's very important.
Well,
Thank you, Wayland.
When you come out, Wayland, Wayland has a hearing on the 8th of May, and we're hoping that it's going to be to his advantage, and that we're working very, very hard on all this. Work for his release.
Goodbye.
Thank you. I think that the best way to wrap up is maybe Lucas, because you brought together this extraordinary collection of academic researchers and practitioners. So maybe just summarize a little bit about social impact and music making, what your network does, or maybe an upcoming program that people might want to hear about? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes. Yes, I will after what Sarah and Onya and Andre had to say, and Wayland, what I have to say is much less interesting. And my personal research is not about music in detention, although when talk about the gang life, I've in my research and ongoing research now in Kinshasa, I'm very much close to these realities because I'm studying music projects with former members of violent gangs in Kinshasa. Anyway, I did look at all the topics that SIM has been involved in over the years in relation to music in detention. It all started in, well, maybe in 2 words, SIM. Those who are here know, but those who may hear this recording later on may not know. SIM is existing since 10 years. It's an international research platform of scholars, people doing research on the role music may have in any type of participatory social and community music projects. And the interest that music in detention and our engagement of SIM, the SIM network, started in Oxford in 2018. It was an initiative of James Butterworth, who organized a working meeting at the University of Oxford in April 2018, and this gathering brought together an impressive cohort of researchers and practitioners actively working on music projects in prison and detention contexts. Following this meeting, James wrote a text which he presented at a few months later at our yearly symposium, which was taking place in Porto. I will send a text with all the links to these documents so that you can find it. And the text of James Butterworth reads like a kind of manifesto. Well, that's also what many people within SIM how it was appreciated, and that it could be seen as a manifesto for future SIM engagement in carceral music research. For example, James wrote, we must be attentive to the personal investments of all involved, researchers, facilitators, participants. Sarah just mentioned today also the family, the impact on the family. Music in criminal justice settings is never neutral. It operates as the intersection of power, care, and vulnerability. He emphasized also in this manifesto the necessity of a shared research community where scholars can exchange findings and critically interrogate their methodologies. And this is exactly what SIM is all about, is bringing together scholars and allowing them within seminars and within conferences to share their findings, but also their methodologies. And in 2020, that was in the midst of the pandemic. We organized several online sessions, and I think some of you here were present. Andre, I remember, and these virtual meetings were really interesting, Zoom meetings, because a range of scholars attended and also practitioners. And it allowed us to continue the reflection and in preparation of further initiatives that the SIM network could take. Some of the things that I took note of really very shortly is possible topics and topics that interest many people involved in research in this field is, first of all, like the limitations of access in prison research and all the impact that has on not only on practitioners but also on researchers. The power dynamics of the researcher-participant relationships. We didn't really discuss this now, but well, this could be like a topic of a meeting, of a whole meeting. 3, the role of music as entity building and quiet resistance. Well, we talked a lot about that today. 4, yeah, tensions between institutional rehabilitation aims and the expressive autonomy that music can allow. You see, well, maybe one last point, which also comes back a lot in discussions I attended with scholars, is the risks that of re-traumatization through musical storytelling. Anyway, so these are like several ideas for maybe separate meetings in the past. I would like to say also that we have a podcast, and 2 episodes of the podcast are on music in detention. In fact, Mary Cohen, which was mentioned by Onya, she's interviewed André. There's an interview with André de Quadros, an interview with John Speyer from the UK organization Hear Me Out. Ines Lamela also, Grasa Motta, Onya, you also had an interview on one of these podcast episodes. So this, I think, these are 1 hour long episodes, and they're also very interesting to listen to and to reflect and to find out much more than what we could here in this webinar cover in this short period. I would like to mention also that, well, it was mentioned by Onya, so that we had, Sim was asked by Musica y Ciencia in 2021 to edit a special issue of the magazine. And in that issue, we had we included 3 articles in connection with music in detention. The one of Onya, which she mentioned. Sarah also, there was also an article of Sarah Doxat-Pratt, and a Portuguese young scholar, Ines Lamela, also wrote an article on her research in Portuguese prisons. Almost finished. Well, no, we organized a research seminar. It's it's the activity I personally prefer of everything we do. It's a 3 to 4 day seminar, bringing together a very limited small group of scholars, maximum 20, and who focus on a specific part of the research. And so we organized one seminar, research seminar on music in detention in Porto in 2021. It was Mary Cohen was the main facilitator together with Ines Lamela and Grasa Motta. And in fact, we're now preparing, for your information, we're preparing in November next year, 26, at the University of Ghent with the academic chair Jeunet, a second international research seminar of the same type. So a 3-day coming together of a small group of scholars. This is one of the initiatives we're now preparing. I think that's
Thank you. No, Lucas, I think that's really helpful, and I think we should post that. I think one of the gaps, though, is that there's all this incredible research going on, really high quality, and yet it's not really that known about. And I'm sure there's also, you know, a crisis happening in UK prisons. They're overcrowded. We've got nearly 100,000 people incarcerated. There's short-term sentences. There's so many different challenges that are being faced. So I guess, you know, off the top of my head, what I'm really wondering about what are the, you know, practicalities of easily trying to integrate or implement types of project, you know, to, on the one hand, deal with a problem that's the growing, and also to, like, allow people to think that, you know, because I think there's a conception that all this is a luxury or a privilege, not a right, which, you know, music is always seen as a sort of very nice add-on, difficult one or an expensive one. So I think there's case for, you know, musical interventions or music making interventions. And I'm now scared of using the word music, but, you know, I'm even thinking like drumming, for example, or, you know, what kinds of things could people who are trying to address these problems, or funders or policymakers, include in their research and their findings? Because that's, I mean, that's where we're hoping to try and be a bit of a bridge. So I'm not saying like give lots of answers now. I'm just saying that's, if there are ideas around that, I think this is what we'd like to be helping to disseminate in our through our research into what you guys are doing.
I would like to shortly react to that. I think that we all of us are busy with this. All of us researchers are busy with how can we how can what we do connect to what people out there. I mean, how can we allow them to profit from our findings? And I think there. During this hour that we spoke, all of us spoke, we have some very interesting examples. I think the example of that Anya mentioned of the in and out, the choir group of people coming in and out is a very important one. Mary Cohen also works a lot on this, on bringing together people from outside of prison and people from inside of prison. Yeah, Andre, you want?
Yeah, and
I was
Sarah's
just
work,
sorry.
I think that there is
Am I interrupting you, Sita?
sorry.
I was saying the interesting thing about bringing outside and inside people together, because that's the core of what we do here in Boston is, and it's also the core why we take Israelis to work with Palestinians, why we take Americans to work with refugees in Mexico, is actually a chance to learn. This is, I think I think if I want to shift the focus a little bit away from, oh yes, it's good for people on the inside. I think it's central to understanding social change. And the people I've taken, I would say, I can't even count the number of people I've taken into these close encounters. And they are forever changed, because when you see the brutality, you see the catastrophe, whether it's in Mexico, whether you see it in the American prisons, whether you see it in the West Bank of Palestine, when you see it, you actually see what's happening with your own eyes, and you can never be the same. I have walked past the cells of people being tortured here in this city. I can't unhear those screams. I mean, so on the one hand, I think the research is critical and fundamental, but the research doesn't obviate the issue that Sita was talking about, which I want to underline what you said, Sita, which is terrific, which is, it's not about we decide who needs what. I think the issue is about rights. And there is in public health, we talk about, there's a difference in a rights-based approach and a needs-based approach. So in a needs-based approach, one pathologizes the intervention, and you say, well, they need this and they need that. And that puts an emphasis on the asymmetrical power dynamics. Now, there's who decides who needs what and what do they need. A rights-based approach recognizes the issue of fundamental issue of human rights. In other words, what are their rights as human beings, whether they are incarcerated or whether they're not? Now, the state can say, well, as a person who's incarcerated, you may not have access to vote, let's say, right? And you don't have, we've taken your freedom away from you. I think there are a couple of issues here. And Waylon raised it a little bit. Clean water, for example, is a fundamental human right, wherever you are in the world. And I believe that access to the arts, music included, is a fundamental, basic human right enshrined in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so understanding the rights-based approach it should be a guiding principle for the issues of incarceration and so forth.
I think I'm going to have to wrap this up. I'm so sorry. I feel like this is such an interesting conversation, but if we want people to actually listen to it, we better stop. But we
Sorry
will
for talking too long.
we'll
Sorry.
summarize some of the findings, and I just want to thank you so much for all of your contributions and all the work that you do. It's so important because, you know, I keep thinking that, you know, the one statistic I always carry around is like 28% of incarcerated people have a learning difficulty of some sort, are dyslexic. So they've fallen through the nets like at primary school. And, you know, there's so much that can be done in this setting to transform lives and enable at least a better life afterwards, possibly. Anyway, thank you again so much, and have a lovely rest of your Easter Monday.
Thanks, Rita.
Thank you so much. Bye.